does not go well. He ends up breaking his knife trying to pry the second one out, and like a shard of this knife like flies off and slices into Morgoth's cheek, and Morgoth like kind of like stirs restlessly, and Beren and Lúthien are both like, hello, welcome to my channel, and welcome to Makeup and Middle-earth Monday, a show where I do a makeup look and talk about a topic I picked out from the Tolkien Legendarium. Today's topic is going to be about Beren and Lúthien. This got, I think, the second to most votes in the last poll I did on Facebook, and I know I have a couple friends who have been like really gung-ho about voting for this in every poll, so I decided to go ahead and do this one after Galadriel last week, just so that the people who have been voting for this can finally rest. If you'd like to contribute your vote to future polls, please consider checking out my Facebook page. Link is in the description box below. Some more housekeeping. At the time of recording this, 95 subs. Wow. I don't know if you can hear the cat yowling, but he's lonely. Not lonely to see me. He doesn't like me. He's lonely for Katie. So 95 subs at the time of recording this video. That's insane to me that there's 95 of you. Sten is still collecting memes for the milestone reaction video that we're going to be doing in March. If you have a meme that you would like featured in that video, you can send it to samletbird@gmail.com and just title it meme review. And if you'd like to be credited for the meme, just put how you'd like to be credited in the body of the email. Or if you prefer to remain anonymous, that's fine too. So today's makeup look is going to be a merperson makeup look. This is something that I wore to Vanguard LARP last summer for a module that one of the plot team members ran. I'm assuming we're going to be doing it again this summer since there was some stuff that he was planning on adding in, hopefully, because it was fun. But I decided to paint my nails for it. They're like a nice sparkly green. So let's get started. So the tale of Beren and Lúthien is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, story in the Tolkien Legendarium. Christopher Tolkien, who is Professor Tolkien's youngest son, has actually talked about his dad telling him the story when Christopher was a child. It's definitely got like more like openly fantastical elements and magic than, say, Lord of the Rings does. It really does have a very like old world fairy tale feel. The tale of Beren and Lúthien is actually one of three core stories. The tale of Beren and Lúthien is actually, I'm just going to keep talking over the cat, one of three core stories in the Legendarium that Professor Tolkien started out with as a framework for bringing his fictional languages to life in a narrative sense. The other two stories are The Children of Húrin, which I need to cover eventually, and The Fall of Gondolin, which I've given like a cursory explanation for during the first Elven Realms episode. If you've been watching this series from the beginning, you may remember a few things from this tale being mentioned in previous episodes. So, the tale of Beren and Lúthien is ultimately a love story. It's one of the more well-known tales in the Quenta Silmarillion. I think a lot of people, even if they haven't actually read the book, are at least familiar with the names Beren and Lúthien. And I personally feel like it has a nice ratio of, like, happy ending to epic tragedy. In keeping with, like, it's in keeping with the theme that all things of beauty in Middle-earth must eventually fade. In the Silmarillion, it's actually described as being most fair still in the ears of the elves. So, like, even in, like, the Third Age, the elves still tell this tale as, like, one of their, like, great stories. So I'm going to give some background on who exactly Beren and Lúthien are before we get into the story. Lúthien was a half-elf, half-Maya princess. Lúthien is actually Sindarin for Daughter of Flowers, and her parents were the Sindarin king of Doriath in the First Age and before the First Age, Eleuthingol, and his queen, the Maya Melian. Lúthien was born in the years of the trees before the First Age, and she was born in this forest of beech trees called the Forest of Neldoreth. And later on, when Morgoth actually returns to Middle-earth with the stolen Silmarils, this forest becomes part of the Girdle of Melian, which is essentially this crazy fence of magic that Melian puts up around the perimeter of the kingdom of Doriath to protect the realm. And it essentially keeps out anyone who doesn't have King Thingol's permission to enter. And they raise this barrier, you know, in an effort to protect their kingdom and their people from Morgoth as, like, their primary antagonist. The Girdle of Melian, I think the quote is that it kept people out with an invisible wall of shadow and bewilderment. And it's actually where Doriath got its name of Doriath, because Doriath translates to Land of the Fence. Melian did, however, make a prediction that one day someone would be able to come through this, like, magical barrier, because essentially their destiny was greater than the power of her magic fence to keep them out. And also, as a side note, I know if some folks struggle with the type of language that Professor Tolkien uses in the Silmarillion, and I guess to a lesser extent his other books, but there's, like, he uses a lot of very archaic language in the Silmarillion, especially, like, I guess it's technically like the Bible of Middle-earth, so you'll hear him use the word doom a lot, and I think it's helpful to, it clarifies it a little bit if you think of doom less as a word that means, like, every, you know, connotation that you think of when you hear doom, and more a word that you could substitute for potentially great and terrible fate. So, yeah, so anyway, this is where Lúthien was born, and she was described as being the most beautiful of all the children of Ilúvatar, basically the fairest and most beautiful woman to have ever lived. I'm going to read a quick excerpt. It's actually from the Lay of Lúthien, which is a really pretty collection of poetry that chronicles the Beren and Lúthien story, and this quote is, "Her robe was blue as summer skies, but grey as evening were her eyes. 'Twas sown with golden lilies fair, but dark as shadow was her hair." And that's from Canto 1, from the Lay of Lúthien. At her birth, there was actually a new flower that started blooming called the Nifredil, and it was like a small white bloom that was described as being like a relative of the snowdrop. So if you know what a snowdrop looks like, I'll probably put like a snowdrop image here. And this Nifredil flower bloomed in Doriath first, but eventually you could see it in other places, especially in Lothlorien. It bloomed on this hill of Ceren Amroth, which I also covered in Elven Realms. But there's an interesting kind of connection with that, because Ceren Amroth is actually where Arwen went to die in the Fourth Age after Aragorn had passed away. And Arwen was actually described as being like the beauty of Lúthien reborn, which makes sense because Lúthien is actually Arwen's great-grandmother. But Arwen was called the even star of her people because she was like the later age reflection of Lúthien. So Lúthien was like the first, like the morning beauty at the dawn of, you know, Elven time frame, and then Arwen was the evening when like the sun was setting on the elves and they were leaving, basically. So then their two characters also have some significant parallels, which we'll get to in a little bit. But Lúthien was the most beloved of all her people, and she was also extremely important to her father, King Thingol. She was his only child, and to see her was to love her, more or less. And she spent a lot of her time singing and dancing in the forests of Neldereth with a bard friend named Daeron, who he would basically make up tunes on his flute to complement her singing and dancing. He was kind of a simp, if I'm being honest. They stayed friends, but he was in love with her, and she did not reciprocate those feelings, so they were friends, and she was not interested in pursuing anything more deeply than friendship with him. And as like a side note about Daeron, he was said to be like the greatest of all of like the elven minstrels, to the point where Maglor, who I mentioned in the Elrond episode, was kind of like the soft boy of Feanor's sons, and he was known for his like amazing skills with the harp as a bard, and he was like the only, like one of like 2 elves that was actually compared being close to Daeron's skill as a minstrel. So Lúthien spent a lot of her time singing and dancing with her friend Daeron, and her singing was so beautiful that it was actually said to be able to bring like spring from winter, which is kind of important because before the first age happened, the elves didn't have the sun, so there was like not really a way for spring to happen organically. That's at least like kind of the impression that I get from the text. And the quote is, "The song of Lúthien released the bonds of winter, and the frozen waters spoke, and flowers sprang from the earth where her feet had passed." So that's Lúthien. Now, Beren was actually a mortal man. He was from the house of Beor, and if you're a little familiar, probably because you watched my channel, hopefully, his father was this dude named Barahir, and this is the same Barahir who actually rescued Galadriel's older brother Finrod during the Battle of the Dagor Bragollach, which is the Battle of Sudden Flame, and that was, which, you know, if you may remember, that battle was the big suck, because that was when Morgoth let all the lava out and burned a bunch of, like, prairie areas and settlements and killed a lot of elves, and Finrod had been like cut off from his allies during that battle, and it was Barahir and his group who essentially like circled him with like a wall of spears, and they took really heavy casualties while they escorted him to safety. So he gave them his ring as like a token of, hey, thanks for coming to the rescue. If you or your descendants ever need help again, just show me this ring and I'll be there, bro. So that's kind of the background for that. Beren was like, he was young when the Dagor Bragollach happened, so I don't think that he actually fought in that battle. But later on, afterwards, the Dagor Bragollach was responsible for doing like a lot of heavy damage to the lands that Barahir's people had settled in. So we get to a point where it's literally just like Barahir and like 10 loyal dudes and Beren. And they're living as like basically outlaws in the highlands of this region, Dorthonion, which is the area that their homes had been before like lava happened. And these 12 dudes get to the point where they've done like a fair few like heroic deeds, and they just become a thorn in Morgoth's side, and he wants to get rid of them, but he doesn't know how to find them. So one of these dudes, and his name is Gorlim, I think it's Gorlim the Unhappy is his name. He's been trying to find his wife for several years now. Like, after the Dagor Bragollach destroyed their lands, his, like, area was one of those lands that was destroyed, and his wife was gone. He didn't know what happened to her. He never found out what happened to her, but he would frequently go out searching for her for some sort of clue as to where she had ended up. And one day, Sauron, who is the chiefest of Morgoth's lieutenants, had his minions out, and they capture Gorlim during one of these searches that he goes on. And they torture him, and eventually they bring him before Sauron himself. And Sauron basically is like, hey man, you know, I know where your wife is. I'll reunite her with you if you tell me where I can find Barahir and the rest of your squad. And Gorlim is basically like, okay, well, if you promise to let me and my wife, like, live freely together, I'll tell you where they are. So Sauron is like, alright, it's a deal. And Gorlim tells him where Barahir and Barahir's men are, and then Sauron is like, alright, cool, thanks. I will definitely reunite you with your wife now. And, stop me if this surprises you, but Sauron actually keeps his word by, murdering the guy because his wife's been dead all along, and, rip. So, shocker, right? I can't believe things have gone so wrong so quickly, can you? And so this betrayal actually allows Sauron's orcs to find and overwhelm Barahir and the rest of his men, and they are all tragically slain, except for Beren, who had been away at the time of the attack. And while he's away, he actually has, like, some terrible, like, prophetic dreams, and I believe Gorlim's shade actually comes to him to try to warn him about, like, this betrayal that has just happened, in the hopes that maybe, like, Beren can get back in time to warn them, but unfortunately, he does not get back in time. So he comes back and finds that his father and all of his father's men have been killed, and he ends up tracking down the party of orcs that committed the deed, and he kills all the orcs. And he retrieves the ring of Barahir from them because they took the ring, I guess, as, like, you know, loot after murdering all these dudes. And he gets the ring back. He spends some time living in Dorthonion alone because all his friends are dead. And over time, he becomes friends with, like, all the birds and the beasts of the area, and he gets to a point where he can use them to help survive in the wilderness. And during this time, he doesn't eat any meat. He just lives off of, like, fruits and berries and vegetables and stuff like that. So he's wandering in the wilderness for a while in this fashion, and eventually, during this whole time, he has to keep moving because Morgoth has, like, basically put a bounty out on his head because he wants him dead. And the bounty gets higher and higher because, like, as Beren is wandering around, he's, like, doing stuff to help people deal with Morgoth's assholery. And Sauron is also hunting for him at this point, you know, because he's got to have the whole collection of dead dudes. And this is kind of around when werewolves start to become a bigger problem, and we know that more or less they, like, Sauron and Morgoth would, like, take evil spirits and kind of use them to infest wolves, and they would, like, breed them somehow. And this is a pastime that Sauron especially gets really into when he captured the Isle of Tolsirion, which had originally been home to a watchtower that Galadriel's brother Finrod had constructed, but Sauron captured it after the Dagor Bragollach fucked a lot of shit up. So eventually Beren is forced to leave Dorthonion to avoid capture, or to avoid being killed. So in year 464 of the First Age, at midsummer, he eventually wanders into Doriath, making it through the girdle of Melian as she had previously prophesied that someone would do. And he ends up in the forest of Neldoreth, where he first glimpses Lúthien dancing in a grove of hemlocks. And Daeron spots him first, and he basically warns Lúthien, and both elves, like, zip off into hiding to get away from the intruder. Beren, of course, fell in love with Lúthien at first sight, and he spent nearly a year wandering through the forest trying to find her. And finally, like, in the following spring, he does encounter her again, and he calls out to her, but he doesn't know her name. So he calls her Tinuviel, which means nightingale. It's a poetic term. It literally translates to daughter of twilight, but it's a poetic term for nightingale because of her singing and dancing were so beautiful that that was the name that he called her by. And he managed to win her over, and they eventually fall in love. and they spend quite a bit of time together in the forest of Neldreth. The quote says, like, no one among the children of Iluvatar had experienced joy so great as the time that they spent together in that forest. But eventually Daeron finds out about it, and out of jealousy he runs to King Thingol and tattles tales on them to, like, say his daughter has been schmoozing around with this gross, icky, lily human man. If I was doing this look at LARP, I would be baking this, which I'm not trying to waste expensive setting spray to bake this makeup when I'm literally gonna take it off my face after I'm done with this video. So we're just gonna pretend. So Lúthien and Beren are gonna go to Doriath, and, well, to Menegroth, which is where they live, where King Thingol lives in Doriath, but they're planning on going there. And Lúthien goes ahead of him and manages to make her dad promise not to have Beren executed for any reason at all. So he agrees to not have this man murdered. That's a good thing, because basically, like, as soon as Beren gets there, he's kind of intimidated, but he manages to, like, declare his undying love for Lúthien, like, as soon as he's brought into court. And Thingol is so angry, he pretty much flat out says the only reason that he doesn't have Beren executed is because he swore that he wouldn't. And there's a lovely excerpt from this scene that I'm gonna read about Beren's reply to Thingol's insult. Then Beren looked up, beheld the eyes of Lúthien, and his glance went also into the face of Melian. And it seemed to him that words were put into his mouth, fear left him, and the pride of the eldest house of men returned to him, and he said, "My fate, O king, led me hither through perils such as few even of the elves would dare. And here I have found what I sought not indeed, but finding I would possess forever. For it is above all the gold and silver, and beyond all jewels, neither rock nor steel, nor the fires of Morgoth, nor all the powers of the elf kingdoms shall keep me from the treasure that I desire. For Lúthien, your daughter, is the fairest of all the children of the world." And then silence fell upon the hall. Thingol's response to this is basically to try to come up with a task he thinks Beren is gonna die trying to accomplish. And so he tells Beren that if Beren brings him a Silmaril out of Morgoth's Iron Crown, that he'll let Beren marry his daughter. If you remember or know anything about the Silmarils, this is a really bad idea. And Melian is actually like, hey, maybe don't involve yourself with the Silmarils, because if you're not careful, you're gonna end up getting yourself caught up in that nasty Doom of Mandos thing that the Noldor are trapped in. But Thingol does it anyway, because he's kind of a hothead. Why on earth would you listen to your wife, who's literally a Maya with prophetic ability? And she really do be spitting out some Cassandra's truths in the Silmarillion, because for some reason he just does not listen to her. But Beren is completely undeterred by this, and he basically, he took the way that Thingol insulted him personally, because, you know, why wouldn't you? And he's basically like, alright, bet. If you want to give away your daughter's hand in marriage on something as trivial as a Silmaril, that's fine by me. Next time you see me, I'll have a Silmaril in my hand. So after that, he leaves Doriath. I believe after he leaves on this quest, Lúthien actually never sings in Doriath again, because it gets, like, really quiet and sad and depressing there, because, like, her singing was really very powerful. So Beren travels to Nargothrond, where he knows that King Finrod Felagund is, whom you may remember I mentioned his oath of assistance to Barahir and all of Barahir's kin. So Beren calls on him, and he shows him the ring that Finrod gave his dad, and he basically tells him that he needs to get a Silmaril out of Morgoth's crown. And Finrod also kind of knows that this is a really bad idea, and he kind of sees his own death in this mission, but he still agrees to go because he gave his word. King Finrod then attempts to call upon his people to find some dudes to go with them, and this does not go particularly well. Up until this point, Finrod has been allowing 2 of the sons of Feanor to stay as guests in Nargothrond, Celegorm and Cudufin, along with Cudufin's son Celebrimbor. Now, if you don't recall, the sons of Feanor, all 7 of them, swore an extremely nasty oath when their father was killed that they would basically do anything that they had to do to retrieve the Silmarils, even to the point where they would kill anybody who got in their way or who possessed a Silmaril and refused to give it up to them, regardless of who it was. I wonder if that's ever gonna come up as a problem. So Celegorm and Curufin actually managed to like turn nearly all of Nargothrond against Finrod because they're too cowardly to go on the quest themselves, and instead they decide to like try to hinder it as much as possible. But they're also power hungry, and they kind of want to depose Finrod and like take his place to rule. So I think it's Curufin actually gives this speech to the people of Nargothrond about how dangerous Morgoth is, that like he manages to be so convincing in that like the majority of the elves in Nargothrond become so terrified of Morgoth that they don't meet Morgoth's forces in open battle for centuries after this. They just use guerrilla tactics, and they use guerrilla tactics actually to pretty great effect. That's another episode, but this is kind of what solidifies their fear of him. Finrod is only able to convince like 10 loyal dudes to actually go with them, and essentially after like rebuking the majority of his people just for their faithlessness, he gives his crown to his younger brother, and in some versions this is his nephew. It depends on if you're reading the Silmarillion or the Unfinished Tales. Orodreth, to act as his steward, and Orodreth was the one who originally held the Isle of Tolsirion after Finrod had finished building the watchtower there, before Sauron took it over and started breeding werewolves there. So Beren and Finrod set out from Nargothrond with these 10 dudes, and on their way to Morgoth's fortress of Angband, they waylay a pack of orcs and kill them, and they take their gear. And Finrod uses his awesome elf magic powers to like make them look like orcs in the orc equipment. Their plan is to kind of hoof it all the way to Angband, but things actually kind of go awry rather quickly, unfortunately, because Sauron sees this group of orcs booking it, not checking in, and all of his people are supposed to check in. Wherever they're going, they're supposed to stop by and check in, and they don't check in, and so he's like, that's super sus. So he manages to capture them all, and he brings them to his tower that he stole to try to figure out who they are. He strips them of their orc disguises and like demands to know who they are and what they're doing. None of them will answer him though, and Finrod actually steps up to defend the group from interrogation, and he engages Sauron in what is basically like a bard battle where they each sing like their magic attack or defense, and Finrod actually manages to hold his own pretty well until the end, when Sauron ends up invoking the kinslaying. And I've gone into that a lot. So like the kinslaying. This is the kinslaying. I don't want to go into it again. But this contest of song is really renowned in history for like the valiant effort. What the hell did I do with my wig cap? I pulled it out and I don't know what I did with it. God damn it. Okay. I literally pulled it out. Oh, it's on the floor. It's on the floor. This is a life hack if you ever have to do scales and you don't want to put a lot of effort in. This is gonna be great because now I have to record part of the video. This. Oh my god. Okay, so if I was doing this at game, I would be using this stuff. I don't know if the camera is gonna pick it up, but this is a liquid that essentially like you can mix with powders, like powder eyeshadow. I'm sorry. You can mix it with powder eyeshadow to make it waterproof. This is what I would be using at a game because it would help keep all this stuff I'm about to put on my face from sweating off. But I'm not going to use it right now because I don't have a lot of it and I don't want to have to buy more. You're gonna see the look. So, unfortunately, like, Finrod eventually falls at Sauron's feet, and they all get thrown into the dungeon. They all refuse to, like, tell Sauron who they are. So he is basically like, okay, cool. Well, you can go in the dungeon, and I'm going to have my werewolves murder one of you, like, one a night, pretty much until you tell me who you are and what it is that you're doing here. So they all get thrown in the dungeon together, and as I said, a werewolf and or werewolves show up and begin murdering these men one by one because they refuse to tell Sauron who they are and what they're doing there, which kind of sucks. Like, Finrod's loyal dudes. So yeah, they start eating these men until it's only Beren and Finrod left. At this point, I'm gonna jump back to Lúthien. I didn't think about the fact that I would have to wear this on my face for like a good chunk of this makeup process. I'm sorry. It's so funny and so stupid looking. I promise it will look good when I take it off my face though. We're gonna jump back to Lúthien. So when they're captured, Lúthien is actually filled kind of like with this sense of foreboding, and she talks to her mom about it, and Melian tells her that, yeah, you are correct. Beren has been captured by Sauron, and bonk. Understandably, this is extremely upsetting news to Lúthien, and she decides to leave Doriath to go help. However, her friend Daron paddles on her to Thingol again, and her dad has her, like, locked up, basically, in this, like, treehouse to keep her safe. Lúthien is undeterred by this, though. And as she's captive, Daron actually, like, he regretted what he done, and they kind of have, like, a reconciliation where he apologizes, and she's kind enough to forgive him. And he ends up moving away and becoming, like, a renowned minstrel elsewhere. But while she's stuck as, like, a captive in this treehouse, she uses a magic to basically, like, make her hair grow, like, super duper fast, so she can weave it into this, like, enchanted cloak that allows her to put her guards to sleep and sneak away. So on her way to rescue Beren, Lúthien encounters this good doggo named Huan, the Hound of Valinor. And Huan is this giant dog, and he's capable of understanding human speech. He's also actually capable of speaking, but he's only allowed to use people words, I guess I should say, 3 times before his death. And he finds Lúthien wandering around in the woods, and he wants to help her, so he brings her to his master, who is Celegorm, the son of Feanor, and Celegorm's brother Curufin, while they're out hunting. And Lúthien basically tells them what's going on, and they absolutely pretend that they didn't just send Beren and Finrod to their deaths. And they, you know, lie to her and are like, yeah, we'll definitely help you. They basically lure her back to Nargothrond, where they immediately lock her up again. It's at this point that Celegorm decides he's going to force her to marry him so that he can be king. He sends some, like, emissaries to Thingol in Doriath, and this absolutely pisses Thingol off because the Sons of Feanor were responsible for the kinslaying, and Thingol is super duper pissed about the kinslaying because, you know, it was his relatives that they fucking murdered. While this is going on, Huan actually becomes friends with Lúthien, and he eventually uses words to speak to her for the first time to, like, give her some advice. And eventually he decides that he doesn't think that keeping her locked up is the right thing to do, so he breaks her out of the room in Nargothrond that they've had her trapped in, and she literally rides him like a horse to get to the tower where Sauron is keeping Beren and Finrod captive. So as Lúthien and Huan are booking it there, another werewolf comes into the dungeons planning to kill and eat Beren because Sauron thinks that Finrod is the most important person, like, to question, which, like, I mean, I guess he's not technically wrong because Finrod is, like, a king, an elven king, but, like, not his quest. So this werewolf is gonna eat Beren, and Finrod uses the last of his strength to break the chains holding him, and then he proceeds to fight this werewolf, quote, with his hands and teeth to defend Beren from it. Finrod kills the werewolf, but he is mortally wounded in the process, and he actually dies in Beren's arms in the dark dungeon of the Watchtower that he originally built to defend his people from Morgoth. Finrod dies, redeeming his oath to Badahir, leaving Beren there alone in the dark, in the dungeon, holding his dead body and mourning his death. And the quote from the book is basically, "Thus King Finrod Felagund, the fairest and most beloved of the House of Finwë, redeemed his oath." And I always get choked up about this part. The only reason I'm not right now is because I have this stupid thing on my face. I can't take anything seriously until it comes off. When Lúthien and Huan arrive at the gates, Lúthien sings. She's singing, you know, a song to try to call to Beren, and he hears her, but he thinks that it's just Sauron, like, being an asshole trying to give him false hope. So he kind of, like, sings this defiant verse back to her, but she still hears him, so she knows he's there. But Sauron also hears her singing, and he starts sending werewolves out there to try to kill her. However, there is this prophecy that says Huan, the Hound of Valinor, is, like, so badass and awesome that the only thing that's ever going to manage to kill him is gonna be, like, the biggest, most badass werewolf ever to have lived. Werewolf. Wolf. The most wolfiest wolf ever. That's what's gonna kill him. Sauron knows about this prophecy. He keeps sending wolves out, and Huan keeps killing them until Sauron is like, okay, I guess I'll switch tack, and he sends out Draugluin, who is credited, I guess, as, like, the father of all werewolves, and Huan fights and kills him too, because apparently he ain't shit. After this, Sauron is like, okay, I guess I will be the werewolf of prophecy. So he turns into the most horrible wolf that he can think of and comes down to fight Huan. And at first, Huan is kind of like, ooh, no, I don't know about this. I don't like the look of this guy. But Lúthien uses her magic cloak to kind of, like, slow Sauron down until, like, Huan can get his nerve back, basically. Huan bests Sauron in this fight. He gets Sauron in his like, Sauron's throat, in his jaws, and no matter what Sauron does, he tries to shapeshift into, like, different creatures, he cannot get free. And at this point, Lúthien is like, okay, so you are going to surrender this entire tower to me, or we're gonna take your skin and send your bitch-ass ghost crying back to Morgoth. Obviously, as a Maya, Sauron won't, like, die if they take his skin, but, like, we know from later on that being disembodied would be very inconvenient for him, because, you know, he gets disembodied after they destroy the One Ring, after Isildur takes the ring, and after they destroy... tangent. So he gives up, basically. This would be inconvenient for him, so he gives up. And they release him, and he, like, turns into this gross, like, vampire bat creature and flies away, dripping, like, blood from his throat the whole way. So after this, Lúthien uses a Song of Power, basically, to destroy the tower and, like, level it. In the process, this frees all the captives that had been in the dungeons, because there were captives there other than, like, the dudes that were with Beren. There's a fair few elves that are actually from Nargothrond that had already been in prison there, so once they're all free, they get to go home, and word kind of gets out about Finrod's death. The people of Nargothrond, along with Orodreth, who is, like, now the king instead of the steward, all turn on Celegorm and Cúrufin, and they kick them out. Goodbye and good fucking riddance. It's even to the point where, like, Celebrimbor is also like, no, Dad, I'm gonna stay here, because you fucked up. So Lúthien finds Beren in the dungeon, and he's, like, laying there, I think basically, like, hugging Finrod's dead body, because he's just so distraught over what's happened. And Lúthien thinks that she's come too late, and that Beren has also died. So she lays down next to him and kind of, like, falls into, like, this grief-stricken sleep. However, When the sun rises, they both wake up and they're reunited. So together they actually bury Finrod's body, and his grave, if I remember right, it actually kind of like purified the area, and his green grave was actually there and undisturbed until Balerion like sank below the sea after like the War of Wrath destroyed the continent. But we don't actually have to be too sad about this, because since he was such an awesome stand-up dude, the Valar allowed him to like reincarnate pretty much as soon as he like reached the halls of Bandos, and he's basically living in Valinor now in paradise with the family that he had left behind during the flight of the Noldor. So happy ending for him. But anyway, after this, Huon returns to Celegorm, because Celegorm is at this point still his master, and Beren tries to convince Lúthien to return to Doriath, where it's safe. And she's basically like, no, you definitely need me on this quest. And you know what? He definitely does need her, because you've been here with me this whole time. I think we can all agree that he would not have got very far without her. So on their way to Angband, they actually run into Celegorm and Curufin, and since the two brothers got kicked out of Nargothrond for being dicks, they decide to be even bigger dicks, and they try to take revenge on Beren and Lúthien. At this point, Huon basically has decided that he's had enough of his master being an asshole, and he joins forces with Beren and Lúthien. And I have to put this back on because I'm going to do a little bit more detailing on the scales, but it's going to be like a different green, so I'm going to do it not on the same patch. Does it make sense? It gives it like a nice depth, kind of. This is how I feel about it. I did the highlight already, but I'm going to do this too. So after Huon decides to switch sides, goddamn, Curufin rides them down and tries to grab Lúthien, but like as he's pulling her up onto the horse, Beren literally like leaps after him, and he grabs them, and all three of them end up on the ground. So Huon helps Beren and Lúthien best these two brothers, and Beren actually takes Curufin's like armor and his horse, and he also takes this cool knife from him called Angrist, which supposedly was capable of cutting iron as if it were green wood. And Beren basically says some shit like, I'm taking your horse and it's probably gonna be way happier with me anyway, because unlike you, I ain't a bitch. So Curufin and Celegorm are forced to run away. But as they're fleeing, Curufin actually shoots an arrow at Lúthien, because, you know, he's an asshole. And he got his poor little Fifi's hurt by getting the shit knocked out of him. And Beren, like, they shoot two arrows, and I think Huon catches one, but anyway, essentially Beren gets shot by like blocking her, so that he takes the arrow instead of her, and it hits him in the chest. And Huon is like, yeah, and like chases after them barking and like runs them off. And then he comes back with some healing herb to help Lúthien fix this arrow wound in Beren's chest. And it's at this point, after healing his wound, they resume their trip to Angband, and Beren actually tries to leave her behind again, because, you know, it's not like she's running this trip or anything. But at this point, she's woke to his plan, and he doesn't manage it. And this is when Huon speaks for the second time, and he basically tells them that their fates are bound together, and there's no separating it, so they decide to infiltrate Angband together. When they arrive at the gates of Angband, they are met with this new creature. He's also a wolf, and this is the wolf Carcharoth, who is actually a spawn of Draugluin. I think the phrase was, he had been fed from Morgoth's own hand with live meat intentionally to like grow him into like this giant terrible monster of a wolf. And he stops him at the gate. They had both come to the gate disguised. She was wearing the skin of this like vampire bat creature named Trinquethil, and Trinquethil was actually the herald of Sauron. So I'm not sure how they got her skin. I'm assuming that she was part of the downfall of his tower when they booted him out after beating the shit out of him. But they have her skin, and then they actually had Huan wearing Lúthien's pelt as a disguise. So Lúthien, like, tosses her sleepy pee-pee cloak over Karkaroth and puts him to sleep. So they get past him, it actually works, and they enter Angband, and they make it into the heart of the fortress, into Morgoth's throne room, which is full of nasty monsters. At this point, I believe it's Morgoth that, like, he sees through Lúthien's disguise. Beren and Huan kind of, like, hide under his throne, pretending to still be Lúthien. But Lúthien offers to sing, and she's like, yeah, I came here as, like, a wandering minstrel, let me sing and dance for your court. And at first, Morgoth is like, yeah, we don't really do that here, but I guess, you know, and so she does. During this performance, Morgoth is like, damn, you know what, this elf woman is actually pretty good, and, quote, then Morgoth, looking upon her beauty, conceived in his thought an evil lust, and a design more dark than any that had yet come into his heart since he fled from Valinor. Thus he was beguiled by his own malice, for he watched her, leaving her free for a while, and taking secret pleasure in his thought. Yikes, dog. So Lúthien is undaunted. She manages to actually enchant the entire court into sleep. So she throws her magic sleep hair cloak over Morgoth, and he literally falls off his throne, passed the fuck out. I'm assuming he's probably snoring like a fucking log. After this happens, Beren, like, runs up, and he uses the knife Angrist that he took from Curufin, and he uses it to, like, pry a Silmaril out of Morgoth's crown. It's at this point that we truly see that Beren is actually pure of heart, because when he picks up the Silmaril, he's able to hold it without being burnt. If you remember previous episodes, I talked about how the Silmarils, they were hallowed, so if you are an evil asshole, or if you have done too many evil asshole deeds, you can't touch them, because they'll burn the shit out of you. And then, in a lapse of judgment, Beren decides to try for another one, because, you know, I guess he figured we might as well try to liberate the rest of them. I wouldn't have. This does not go well. He ends up breaking his knife trying to pry the second one out, and, like, a shard of this knife, like, flies off and slices into Morgoth's cheek, and Morgoth, like, kind of, like, stirs restlessly, and Beren and Lúthien are both like, shit, okay, maybe we shouldn't do this. So they take the Silmaril they actually have, and they book it, like, they book it out of Angband. But Karkaroth has woken up, and he stops them when they try to leave through the gate. Beren, like, lifts up the Silmaril with his right hand and like tries to tell this wolf to fuck off, but Karkaroth sees the Silmaril and he wants it, because, like, everybody fucking wants these things, so he bites off Beren's hand, swallowing it and the Silmaril in the process, and I imagine he immediately regretted this decision, because, like I said, you can't touch a Silmaril without getting burnt if you're evil, and swallowing this Silmaril creates this absolutely agonizing pain in Karkaroth's stomach, that because it basically starts burning him from the inside. So he runs off howling, trying to make it stop burning, leaving Beren and Lúthien alone. And Beren falls again, this time because, like, the wolf's teeth actually were, like, venomous, and Lúthien has to basically, like, suck the poison out of the stump of his arm, which things are starting to look grim, because the throne room has begun awakening after the enchanted sleep, and they think that they're about to get snatched. But they get rescued by the eagles, basically, and they get carried back to Doriath, where Lúthien, like, nurses Beren back to health. There's at some point during this time frame that Karkaroth, the horrible wolf, actually ends up becoming the second thing to have a destiny so powerful that he can breach the girdle of Melion. So he starts terrorizing Doriath, like, in this frenzy of tummy ache, He just starts like killing anything he can get his teeth on. He starts eating anything he can get his teeth on because he's just trying to like quench this horrible, painful burning sensation in his tum-tum. So that's going on. And after Lúthien heals Beren, they return to her father in Menegroth and basically tell him that what happened up to the point, and Beren is like, even now I hold a Silmaril in my hand, and Thingol was like, alright, where is it? And Beren is like, it's right here, and he shows him like the stump of his like right arm, and at this point Thingol is basically like, alright, you know what, fair enough, I can see there's no power on this earth that's gonna keep you guys apart, so I guess you have my blessing. And Beren and Lúthien get married. Yay! Happy ending! You didn't think that was the end, did you? Karkaroth becomes such a problem that they have to deal with him. They can't just ignore him, they have to go out and deal with him. So, a hunting party consisting of Thingol, Beren, Huan, and then these two elves named Beleg, Strongbow, and Mablung. They're tracking him, they're trying to get to him. He like crosses their path while he's drinking like a bunch of water out of a stream, trying to like calm down his acid reflux. He basically hears them coming before they realize he's there. So he kind of hides like while the water in his stomach is helping mitigate the burny sensation of the Silmaril. He attacks them. He manages to get Thingol, and he's almost about to kill Thingol when Beren gets in the way with his spear. Beren more or less like sacrifices himself to stop Karkaroth from killing Thingol. And then Huan comes over and he battles Karkaroth, finally killing him, but Huan is mortally wounded in the process because, as it turns out, Karkaroth is the greatest of the wolves to have ever lived. Bummer. So Huan is dying, and Beren puts his hand like on Huan's head. He's the goodest boy, and Huan speaks one final time before dying, and it's basically said that he can bid Beren farewell and wish him like all the best. After that, I think it's Mablung that actually cuts open Karkaroth's stomach, and he finds the Silmaril in there, and he finds that like the wolf's insides have been like charred by this Silmaril having just been burning him from the inside. And he also finds that Beren's hand is like still intact, like clutched around the jewel, but when he reaches out for it, the hand like it disintegrates basically. And he takes this I guess I'm just gonna have to do the rest of this recording with the fucking cat yowling in the background, so sorry about that, but like, I don't know what to do about it. So, Mablung puts the Silmaril in Beren's hand, and Beren hands it to Thingol and is basically like, at last, the quest is fulfilled. So they carry him back. Lúthien like runs out as he's basically dying in her arms. Before he finally completely passes away, she tells him to wait for her in the land beyond the sea. And after he dies, she lays down next to him and dies of a broken heart. And her spirit goes where all spirits of the elves go, to the halls of Mandos. And when she arrives there, she actually sings a song to Mandos, who is the keeper of the elven dead. And this song is basically, elves in Valinor still sing this song to like honor like her memory, because it was the greatest song that has ever been sung and will ever be sung, because this is the one and only time that Mandos has ever been moved to pity. So he is so moved by this song that he ends up going to confer with Manwë, who is the king of, well, the king, the lord, whatever, the lord of the Valar. And Manwë is the only one who actually, like, directly speaks to Eru Ilúvatar, the one god, and, like, takes counsel with him. So he talks to Ilúvatar about it, because the Valar they have control over elves, but they don't have any influence over the fate of men. They don't even know where men go when they die. So he talks to Ilúvatar about it, because Ilúvatar is really the only one who knows that. And basically, they get his permission to give Lúthien a choice. She can remain in Valinor in eternal peace and happiness with her people, but without Beren, or she can return to Middle-earth with Beren for one final chance at life together, but she has to surrender her immortality and be counted among the men when she dies, and when she dies, it will be a final death, and she will never return to Middle-earth ever again. She'll be separated, from her family and all that, and she chooses to be with Beren because she loves him, and they are actually permitted to return to Middle-earth together, both now mortal. So they return to Doriath. At first, their return, it makes Thingol feel better, but Melian immediately looks at her daughter, and she sees that Lúthien will one day be parted from her forever. And the book says that there has never been grief greater than Melian the Maya when she learned that her only child was to die. So yeah, that's I think that's sad. I feel really bad for her. And then Beren and Lúthien, they went to live on this island in the river Andurant called Tolgalin. Tolgalin is Sindarin for Green Isle. So they live there together alone. They have a son called Dior, and Dior, of course, is Elrond's grandfather. And Dior was, I believe it was Dior the Fair or Dior the Beautiful. He was pretty. I mean, I assume he would be, since Lúthien was his mom. They live there in peace for a while until one day word reaches them that Thingol has actually been murdered by dwarves, and Doriath was sacked. So upon the death of her husband, Melian just abandons Middle-earth entirely, and she goes back to Valinor because, she's not gonna stick around to watch her daughter die too. So she leaves. But Beren and Dior actually end up going, and they take a group of elves. I think they take some Ents with them too, actually, and they hunt down the dwarves that murdered the king and stole a bunch of treasure, and they kill all the dwarves. The treasure sinks to the bottom of the river, but they manage to retrieve the Silmaril from them because they took the Silmaril in this thing called the Nauglamir, which is this really pretty necklace that the dwarves made. Thingol had commissioned them to set the Silmaril in the Nauglamir. They set it, and then they were like, no, we're not going to give this to you because this is really special. You need to pay us more money. And he was basically like, I'm not going to pay you more money than what we previously agreed on. And then he said some racist shit, so they were like, okay, and they murdered him. Beren retrieves the necklace with the Silmaril in it, and then he goes back to Tolgalin, and he gives the necklace to Lúthien, and I believe it's at this point that their son Dior stays in Doriath, and he becomes the king since Thingol died. So he becomes the king there, and he gets married to a nice elf lady. I think her name is Nimloth. He becomes king of Doriath after Thingol's death, and Beren basically gives the Nauglamir to Lúthien, and Lúthien wears it. And there's a quote from the book that's basically the land of the dead that live, because, okay, so the elves, ended up calling this island the land of the dead that live, because Beren and Lúthien both, came back from the dead. Some of the elves thought that was kind of spooky, so the land of the dead that live became like a vision of the land of the Valar, and no place has since been so fair, so fruitful, or so filled with light. Beren and Lúthien lived there together until they both finally died, and no one actually knows where their bodies are buried. Beren and Lúthien's line of descendants went on to include both Arwen and Aragorn, so I guess you could call them cousins, but on the one side you have Dior, Elwing, Elrond. And on the other side, you have, Dior, Elwing, Elros, and then, thousands of years worth of Númenorian kings, and then Númenorians in exile, and then the Dunedain. The more you know. Basically, like, according to legend, their line of descendants was never broken, and their legacy lived on until the world itself ended. And that's Beren and Lúthien. I really love the story because I'm always a slut for, like, tragic romance. I think this story is a lot of fun. It's both beautiful and tragic, but you can also really see, like, a lot of the influences that Tolkien had, particularly, like, this one particularly, like, it really reminds me of, like, the Greek story of Orpheus traveling to the underworld to try to get Hades to release the spirit of his, like, wife Eurydice. Although, like, I mean, you know, I think that Beren and Lúthien has a little bit more satisfying of an ending, because they did end up together at the end of it, and it wasn't bullshit. But, Lúthien is based off of Tolkien's wife, Edith. They had, like, a very loving, supportive relationship. They actually met when Tolkien was 16. He and his younger brother, they were living in a boarding house, and they were living in the same boarding house as Edith at the time. She was 19. Her room was, I think, directly below his, so they would spend a lot of time, like, chilling on, like, their respective balconies, just, like, chatting. I think she was studying music at the time. Like Beren and Lúthien, they actually faced some opposition from authority. In this case, it was Tolkien's guardian at the time, who was this Catholic priest. His name was Father Francis Morgan. He basically had become the Tolkien brothers' guardian after both of their parents had passed away. He disapproved of Edith because of the age gap, because she wasn't Catholic, and because, like, he thought their relationship was having, like, a negative effect on Tolkien's grades and his, like, work towards earning a scholarship to go to university. So eventually, like, it got to the point where Father Morgan, like, forbade them from seeing each other until Tolkien turned 21, hoping that, like, a couple of years to, like, divide them would stop the romance, like, entirely. Tolkien got his scholarship, and then, like, as soon as he turned 21, he wrote Edith a letter asking her to marry him. It had been enough long of a time that she had actually, like, moved on. She had gotten engaged to, like, another dude, and she ended up breaking off her engagement with the other dude to marry Tolkien. She converted to Catholicism for his sake. So, like Lúthien, she gave up a lot to be with the man that she loved. The people that she was living with at the time were, like, vehemently anti-Catholic, so when she converted, they basically kicked her out, and they wouldn't speak to her anymore. So she gave up a lot for him. So, like, in World War I, very tragically, he was, like, the sole survivor of his group of literary school friends. So he basically watched all of his friends die in the trenches after, you know, everybody that he was friends with was killed. They stationed him in Yorkshire because he had trench fever. The scene in the book where Beren first sees Lúthien when she's, you know, dancing in the Hemlock Grove is actually based off of a real moment that Edith and Professor Tolkien had together. The Tolkien couple were walking, like, through the woods one day, and they found that, like, this grove where, like, hemlocks were blooming, and Edith danced and she sang a song for her husband, and pretty much in that moment Lúthien was born. So, like, this moment was so magical and this memory was so precious to him that he basically immortalized it for generations of readers after, and Lúthien is Edith. Their shared gravestone actually has Beren is inscribed under Professor Tolkien's name, and Lúthien is inscribed under his wife's. She died in 1971. In letter 340, he said, "I never called Edith Lúthien, but she was the source of the story that in time became the chief pan of the Silmarillion. It was first conceived in a small woodland glade filled with hemlocks at Roos in Yorkshire, where I was for a brief time in command of an outpost of the Humber garrison in 1917, and she was able to live with me for a while. In those days her hair was raven, her skin clear, and her eyes brighter than you have ever seen them, and she could sing and dance. But the story has gone crooked, and I am left, and I cannot plead for the inexorable Mandos." I just have a lot of emotions about stuff like this. So I just think it's really beautiful that he took such a precious memory from his younger years with his wife and immortalized her for generations to come. Anyway, here's the look. I made this necklace myself. I did it with a tutorial that I found online, so I will post it in the description box if you want to know how I did it, because I can't take credit for this, but I am proud of how it turned out. And I did the wig styling. I sewed all these in. I hand stitched like the shells and the pearls into the wig, and then I did the painting for the prosthetics. Anyway, now that we've reached the end, it's time for a segment I like to call Metal Music Monday. This is where I recommend a song from my metal library. Maybe we like the same music, maybe it's new to you. Either way, I hope you enjoy it. Song of the week is Born Again by Beast in Black. This song is somewhat topical. The singer is like lamenting the loss of true love, wishing to be reborn and reunited until the next life. That's how I interpreted it. There's a lyric that I love from this song, and it is, "Love is a killer that never dies, murdering its victim with delight." And I just like, peak emo. Peak emo metal. Somebody's gonna get mad at me for calling it emo metal, but like, it's a really good song and I like it a lot, so you should check it out. Yeah, that's it. I hope you enjoyed our time together. I know that I really did, but even if you didn't, I appreciate you giving me the chance. If you did enjoy, I would love it if you left me a like or a comment, or hit that subscribe button, or especially if you wanted to share my stuff. Until next time, Namaste.